Welcome to the second session of the Fall Club through Renee's House of Quilting. This week we're going to go over our second project, which is the jacket or band around a jar. And this you can fill with treats. You can leave it on your desk at work for your co-workers to help themselves, or it'd be a nice gift for a friend or a neighbor. And so tonight we're going to show you how we did this. This jar I bought at Dollar General, where my mother always said generally nothing was $1, and she was she was correct. This was $4, but I still thought it was a pretty good bargain. So this jar, which is a nice sized jar, came from Dollar General, $4. What you need to do, I went back to get another one of these, and of course they were gone, but they had this size. So the first thing that you need to do before you even figure out what block you're going to use is how big around your jar is. So take a soft or plastic, or these used to be cloth tape measures, and you're going to measure the circumference or how big around that jar is. This one happens to be about 13 3/4 inches. I think I would go with 13 1/2 because it's just easier. Because you're going to have, if you can see on the back here, you need a little space in between too. So close is pretty good for this. Just kind of like horseshoes and hand grenades. Close is good. So when we looked in the book, the smallest block that they have in the book happens to be this chevron pumpkin, which we talked about a little bit last week about how to do the sew and flip method and techniques to make that successful. So that is the smallest. There's a couple of them in here that are 5-inch square. If you happen to have a jar that's taller than this one, a 5-inch square might work. If so, then you're going to need to adjust the measurement here, but it's very easy to figure out. This was a 3-inch block finished, so this is a 3-inch band finished. It's just like that, nothing hard. So I am going to go, I made then a pattern that is paper pieced. If you don't know how to paper piece, or you don't like paper piecing, it's probably because you didn't have me for a teacher. Yes, there you go. So I'm just going to briefly go over how to paper piece. So the first thing that you're going to do is, when you go tomorrow or whenever you go to Renee's, you're going to get one sheet that gives you the instructions for making this cute little jacket for the jar, and it tells you how to do it for any diameter jar. And then along with that, you're going to get this paper piece pattern, which is the witch's hat. On this one, I gave you the instructions for how large to cut the pieces that fit in the different pieces here. So for example, it says A1 and A3 are a 3-inch square, and A2 is a 3x4 rectangle, so that you know beforehand how big to cut the square or rectangle that you're going to use for your paper piecing, which is a very nice thing of me to do. So you're going to take your pattern here, and you're going to put a piece of, this happens to be Carol Doak's foundation paper, and it runs through your printer very easily. And the nice thing about it is it tears easily. So once you have your pattern printed onto your foundation paper, then the next thing that you need to do, because I designed this in sections, is it's just easier if you cut this apart. So you're going to cut it either on the seam allowance line, which is the outside line, or close to it. You just don't want all that paper hanging out when you're trying to sew things to it. So my first, it's ABC 1 2 3, so it's very simple. So the first thing that we're going to do is this A section, and this happens to be the point of the witch's hat. And because I had some pieces left over, and I hate to cut into a big chunk when I might need it for something, I had this handy dandy little triangle left from a piece of something that I made. I think the Big Witch's hat. So what I want you to get into your brain is that the paper is the wrong side of your block. That's the first thing that you got to put in the brain. Okay, this is the wrong side. So I want the right side of my fabric facing out, right? Because I'm putting wrong side. This is the wrong side. So I took this little triangle, and lo and behold, it was big enough. It's going to fit there for me. You might want to just put a pin in this so that it doesn't move around, because it's paper and it's fabric and it's slippery. The next thing that I do to make life easier for myself is, this is A1, A2. That's where you're going to sew. 1, 2. So on the outside, while I have this facing me, I fold that down and give it a good crease like that. So this is the outside. When I open that up, I have that crease right here. So then I'm going to take the next piece, and it tells me it's a 3-inch square. Now, you have to pay attention to which way it's going to go. So it needs to cover here. So you're going to pick that up, and you're going to put it this way. Okay? Because it has to go this way. Not usually nervous when I do this when nobody's watching. Okay, so we're going to put that like that. Then you're going to take a flathead pin, and do you sell these?
Yes.
Renee's got those. And you're going to, you can see it, you're going to go lay this down flat on something and go right along that seam line and catch those 2 pieces of fabric. So what I did was I pinned that right along that seam line. I check back here. Yes, I have caught enough of it. And then my final check is I'm going to open this up. Yes, I have right sides together. And yes, this piece of fabric is large enough to cover all the way around, seam allowances and everything. So can you see that? I got that all ready to go.
Looks good.
So then what you do is you leave this pin in. The next thing that you have to do is you have to get your machine ready. A machine, when you turn it on, normally defaults to 2.5 on this Bernina. That means it's about 10 stitches per inch. You want 15 at least per inch for 2 reasons. You're going to be pulling paper off of these seams. If you use the longer stitch length, you're more likely to pull the stitches out. Also, you don't backstitch in this technique, and so you could undo the seam that way. Plus, if you perforate the paper more times, it's going to come off easier. The more times you put holes in it, the easier it's going to pull off. So turn your machine down to 1.8 is on what I do on the Bernina. The next thing that I want you to know is when you start, I don't know if you can come down here. When you start, you want to start about here. So don't try to start right at the point. Come away about 1/8 of an inch or so. That's where you're going to start your stitching, and you're going to stitch all the way down, and you're going to go off of that line 1/8 of an inch or so. And that also prevents you from pulling that seam out. So I'm sewing again between A1 and A2. Remember, it's ABC. And I've got my stitch length turned down. I leave that pin in until I get to it, and then I just sew along that line. And I'm going to go a little bit over. Then, this is the seam that I just sewed, correct? I just sewed between A1 and A2. This is what you want to do. You want to flip your paper back right on that seam that you just sewed. So this is your seam allowance here. You want to make sure that the piece that you just sewed is out of the way, that it's on the back. And you're going to take This is called an add a quarter. Now this is a long one. They also come in shorter lengths, but I got the long one because sometimes I do longer pieces of paper piecing, especially if you do the Judy Niemeyer ones. This has a lip on it. That's what makes it so nice. Now you could just go like this and take a ruler. Yes, you can. Nobody says that's not and cut it off. But if you're demoing this and you're nervous, I'm telling you, you're going to go one way and the ruler's going to go the other. But not in this case, because it's got that little lip, nobody goes anywhere. You take your rotary cutter and you cut off the excess. Okay? So what I want you to get into your brain is a method. Do it the same way every time. So now I flip my paper back. Then I'm going to flip up that piece that I just sewed, stitched. There we go. And then you're going to finger press that. Okay, you're going to come over. If you have one of these nice little mats and a little iron, and you're just going to press that. Okay, now you've set that, the first one. Okay, now the second one, remember, keep it in your head. Okay, the first thing that I do is go on this side. I fold on that line that I want to stitch on. So I'm going to crease that because that gives me a fighting chance to know which way I need to turn this piece. So here's where I creased it. Black is so nice to see. So this is where I creased it. So I'm going to lay this right along. I can see the crease here, and I'm a little bit more than that line, so that's my seam allowance. Flip it over, take my flathead pin, and pin right along that line. Okay? Because pulling out these little tiny stitches isn't any fun, you definitely want to take the time to pin first. Flip it over. Make sure that you've got enough of the seam allowance there. Flip it back where it would be sewn. And yes, it covers this space here. So I'm good to go again. So I'm going to come back here. Now I'm going to sew between A2 and A3. Remember 1, 2, 3. Make sure that that isn't flipped up. So right on the line, get that out of the way. Okay, my next step in my routine is I fold the one that I just sewed, stitched back, fold it like that. Yes, everybody's good. I've got enough of a seam allowance. This is back out of the way, so I want to get rid of my excess fabric. So I lay my add a quarter and get rid of it. Okay? So then my next step, fold that paper back, turn it over, finger press that, and then take it to the iron and give it a little smash there. Now, you have the option now, you've got this funny looking thing here. You have an option, some people like to baste right here. So this is your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. This is the actual finished edge of the block right here. This is your seam allowance, all this excess here. Some people will baste in there like I did here. So I basted all the way around just to hold that while I trim it. This is so little, you may not need to do that. So we're going to pretend here that we don't need to do that because we're so good. So you're going to trim this down. You just want to get rid of that excess paper and excess fabric. And remember, this is this 1/4 of an inch right here. Ooh, that went through. Okay. So I would continue to do that. Trim this down here. This is my 1/4 of an inch here. I got a little ear sticking out there. Cut that guy's ear off. There we go. So now remember, this is the wrong side. Remember, this is the right side. So I have my little top of my witch's hat started. So then you would continue. So this one is sewn. And then I sewed the B just like I did the A. Fold it, make sure that the piece of fabric is going to fit, pin it, stitch it, use 1.8, which is 15 to 18 stitches per inch on your sewing machine. And that's going to make life easier. Then once you get all 3 sections sewn, then you just take, put that down because there's a mistake, and you're going to line up right sides together. Again, I take a pin and then I go through my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and make sure that I hit it on the other side. So see, I hit it here, I hit it here. Okay, and you're going to flip that one down. You're going to do the same on this side. Take that pin, stick it through the seam allowance here, and it came out there. And we should go buy a lottery ticket because this is working. Okay, now I'm going to stitch this one more time. Again, oops, I'm going to start, hit it right there. Take that, don't sew over pins. The machine repair guys like you to sew over pins because that keeps them in business, but don't sew over pins. Okay. What did I do? I sewed it backwards, but if you sewed it correctly, you would have, oh no, I didn't sew it backwards. No, I didn't sew it. No, this is the way it came out. This is the way it's supposed to be. And if you can see my scribbling there, this is another way that I keep myself sane. I wrote black and background. So even though I thought I did it wrong, I did it right because I wrote black and background. So it's correct. So there's my cute little witch's hat. Now all I need to do is just tear the paper off. Now because I basted that, I have to get rid of that basting stitch, but I'll show you on this one how easy it is. You just tear the paper off. Boom, it's gone. Okay, and once you have the paper all off, which really isn't that bad, it's just do it.
I give it to Glenn.
Yeah, give it to your husband. Or the kids. They probably like to tear stuff up. Give them that. Just take that paper off all the way around. No paper left. And then you're going to press it well. I press the seam open to get rid of the bulk. So on this 1/4 of an inch here, I would take this and I would press this seam open, because that gets rid of so much bulk. Because you got lots of seams coming together, even though it's a little one. And there. See how nice that came out? Thank you, Lord. So once you have your block all made, now you're ready to sew it into the band. I'm going to take this band off so that I can show you the parts of it. As I said, this block finishes to 3 inches. So I tell you in your directions that the first thing that you want to do is to make your block. It doesn't have to be this one, but whatever, you need to do that first, because that'll determine how wide you cut your band. This is 3, so I tell you to cut this band 3.5, because this is 3.5 before you sew it. Got it? Then I tell you, so you take your measurement, and in this example here, I say that my jar was 19 inches around. And I tell you to subtract the block from that 19 inches. So I took 3 inches off of one of these strips. So I cut a strip 19 inches, cut 3 inches off. Or you can just cut a strip 16 inches, whatever works for you. I tried to keep it as simple as I could, but you can always think ahead of me. Once you get that piece cut, so again, this was 16 inches, you want to cut it in half. And then you're going to sew 1/2 to this edge of the block and the other half to this edge of the block. And I tell you to sew right sides together. I tell you to use a 1/4 inch seam. Once you have this sewn together, then you're going to measure whatever that is. And again, in the case of this, it was 19 inches. And then I cut 2 pieces of rickrack. This happens to be jumbo rickrack. That's what it's labeled on the package. I cut 2 pieces of that, and I put it right sides. So I put the right side of the rickrack to the right side of the fabric. I stitched it at a 1/4 inch away, which made it stand up nicely, okay? So you're going to take the right side of your fabric, the right side of the rickrack, put those 2 pieces together, and stitch them on both sides. Then I tell you to cut a piece of fusible fleece, was what I used for padding in here, and you want to cut that 1/2 inch narrower. So this happened to be 3.5. I cut my fleece 3 inches. That keeps it out of the seam allowances, which you've already got rickrack in there. So if you put the fusible fleece in there too, it gets a little thick. So I cut my strip 3 inches, which I tell you in the directions, 3 inches wide by the length that I needed. And then I fused it to the front. Then I took a second piece, and this one is the full 19 inches because there's no block in there. You use the full length. And before I sewed it right sides together, you have to put this little piece of elastic, and it's called string elastic or cord. I knew it was on here somewhere. So this is elastic cord, and what I tell you to do in your directions is to fold it in half so you have a loop. You want the loop to be facing towards the center, so the 2 ends of the elastic will actually be on the edge of your strip. And I show you that right here. It tells you which way to face that loop. And then you want to sew back and forth across this. Now I sewed back and forth across this, which I thought was a lot of times, and the first time that I pulled hard on it, out came one, which makes you say bad words. So rather than take it apart, I just sewed it again on the outside. But you try very hard to go back and forth. Use a straight stitch, use a small straight stitch. Go back to your 1.8, so you're getting lots of stitches in there. And then right sides together, you're going to stitch it, leave an opening for, I left about a 3-inch opening on one of the long edges here for turning. Before you turn it, you want to clip your corners. And when you clip corners, you want to clip them on an angle, but you also, so say for example, this is the corner that I just sewed. So yes, you clip it on an angle. Don't cut through your stitching, but you also want to eliminate a little bit of the bulk on the side, so you kind of round that. And Renee knows this because it's a dressmaking technique. Okay, you're going to get rid of a little bit of that too, so that you're not shoving so much in that poor little corner. So that's my other tip. So you poke that out, and you want to use a point turner, not a knitting needle. Don't try to pull it out with a needle because you'll make a mess. So you want to use a point turner, which looks like this. And you're going to poke those corners out with this end, so you get a nice rounded corner. Then you want to take it to your ironing board, squirt it a little bit with, I use just water, because this is our fabric has already been starched with, what is that we use?
Precision piecing spray.
Yeah, precision piecing spray is what was used on this. And so if you just take a mister with some water on it and then press it well. Now you've got that little opening on one side that you have to deal with. So what I did was I top stitched it. So you're going to top stitch along the top and the bottom. Because this little piece of elastic came out and made me mad, I had to go back and then I top stitch the sides. You sew a button directly across from where your loop is, and you've got your little band.
And you can sew your button on your machine?
And you can sew the button on. This happens to be a 4-holer. I suppose you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you can sew your button on your machine. And then you have your band. Now, if you have questions, if I can help you with paper piecing, again, just play this over again. Get it in your head that the paper is the wrong side. That'll start you off on the right foot, being on the wrong side. Get it? Then the next thing is get yourself a method, a rhythm. Always do it the same way, and you'll be fine. It's not hard. If I can do it, as they say, anybody can do it. So today, Moda, God love them, has come out with, it's called Stitch Pink. Can you get that? Don't burn yourself. So Stitch Pink is, because October, as you know, is breast cancer awareness. I am a breast cancer survivor, thank you, Lord. So this, when they came out with this and it was pink, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to do that. So I've made a big commitment because it's a block a day. So every day you can download and print out the directions to make one block. The website is Modafabrics with an S.com. As soon as you get on their website, Stitch Pink is the first thing that comes up, and you click on that, and it gives you the fabric requirements, the yardage, if you want to have your background all the same. And in that one, they're using their different shades of pink grunge. But to me, that was a little boring. And so Renee picked out those. So look at what I get to use to make my blocks. And she even brought me some background fabric. So I am going to use these beautiful pinks that she brought me. And there's some purple and pink in there, which will give me some nice contrast to make these blocks. And we hope that you will share the blocks that you make using this, which is provided by Moda. The one thing that I want you to know, maybe some of you aren't aware of this, but if you go to Renee's, she has a deal. If you get 12 fat quarters, you pay for 10. So pick out 12, you're going to get 2 free. And that's a big savings. That's even more than a 15% discount, Glenn says. So if you come to Renee's, pick out your beautiful pinks or whatever colors you want. If you have trouble, if you are not computer savvy, if you don't have a printer, if you just don't want to do it, we will do this for you. We will print out these. We'll have some available at her store. If you make a purchase, here, this is our gift to you. If you don't feel like you want to make a purchase, you just want this, please cover the cost of her paper and her ink with a minimal $1.50. That'll at least offset her time and, printing this. And ink is not cheap. So we appreciate you doing that, and we look forward to seeing your blocks. Next session, we will be going over the towel and how I made that and the block that I used for that. So thank you again for joining us. We're thrilled that so many people have shown interest in this. It makes us feel real good and gives us a happy heart. So thank you. Bye-bye.